It all started with an innocent conversation over dinner, but little did I know that night would set the stage for something that would change me forever. The room was warm and intimate, lit by the flickering glow of candles casting soft shadows on the walls. A faint hum of jazz played in the background, creating a sense of calm I rarely found these days. The aroma of roasted garlic and freshly baked bread lingered, making the moment feel almost cinematic. It was the kind of evening where everything felt just right, until he said those words. "I've been thinking about something," my husband began, his voice measured, cautious. He toyed with his fork, avoiding my eyes, the subtle tremor in his tone catching me off guard. I paused mid-bite, my curiosity piqued. "What is it?" I asked, offering a reassuring smile, unaware of the storm about to roll in. He hesitated, exhaling deeply before looking up. "I want us to try something different, something that could be exciting for both of us." A nervous laugh escaped my lips. "Different? Like what? A new vacation spot? A hobby?" His gaze held mine, unflinching now. "No. Something more intimate. I was thinking about you spending a night with someone else." For a moment the world seemed to stop. The clink of silverware against plates, the music in the background, even my own breathing, all of it faded into a deafening silence. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" My voice trembled, betraying the swirl of emotions rising in my chest. Shock, disbelief, and a faint tinge of anger. "It's not what you think," he rushed to explain, leaning forward. "It's just a fantasy, a harmless experiment. Something new to spice things up, to bring us closer." His words felt like a foreign language, each syllable cutting through the delicate fabric of my understanding of our relationship. My mind raced with questions. Why would he suggest this? Was I not enough for him? Was there something he wasn't telling me? "You're serious?" I finally managed, my tone sharper than I intended. He nodded, his eyes pleading for me to understand. "I've read about couples doing it. It's not uncommon. We'll set rules, boundaries. It'll be safe." Safe? The word echoed in my mind, mocking me. How could something like this ever feel safe? My instinct was to reject the idea outright, to walk away from the absurdity of it all. But then, doubt crept in. Was this a test of my love for him, or perhaps a desperate attempt to salvage something he felt we'd lost? "You don't have to decide now," he added softly, sensing my turmoil. "Just think about it." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The dinner grew cold, the music faded into the background, and my thoughts churned like a storm. That night, lying awake in bed, I wondered, was this a path to deeper intimacy or the beginning of something that would tear us apart? When he arrived at the door, his presence filled the room like a storm cloud, heavy and unpredictable. The doorbell rang sharply, slicing through the fragile silence in the room. My chest tightened as I glanced at my husband, who smiled reassuringly, his calm demeanour at odds with the storm of nerves raging within me. He walked to the door, every step measured, deliberate, as though he had rehearsed this moment 100 times. I sat frozen on the couch, my hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white against my skin. I didn't know what to expect, but a part of me prayed it wouldn't be as unsettling as my imagination had made it. The door opened, and there he stood. The man was taller than I anticipated, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He stepped inside, his movements fluid, almost predatory. Dressed in a crisp white shirt that hugged his athletic frame and dark jeans that seemed tailored to perfection, he exuded a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His skin was smooth and deep, his features sharp and striking, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through me. I felt my stomach churn. He wasn't just attractive, he was magnetic, the kind of man who could command attention simply by walking into a room. But there was something else, something beneath the charm that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It wasn't his appearance, it was the way he carried himself, the way he scanned the room as though he already owned it. "Welcome," my husband said warmly, extending a hand. The man's handshake was firm, deliberate, and I noticed how his eyes flicked toward me even as he exchanged pleasantries. "And this must be her," he said, his voice deep and smooth like velvet laced with steel. His gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt as though I couldn't breathe. "Yes," my husband replied, glancing at me with an encouraging nod. "This is my wife." There was a pause, a beat too long, where the man's eyes lingered on me. I shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, feeling exposed, vulnerable. I managed a polite smile, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nice to meet you." He grinned, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The pleasure is all mine." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. My husband, seemingly oblivious to the tension, led us to the living room, gesturing for the man to sit. I remained on the edge of the couch, my body stiff, every muscle coiled like a spring. The man sat across from me, his posture relaxed, his legs spread confidently as though he belonged there. They began to talk, light-hearted conversation about mundane topics, sports, travel, business. My husband's laughter filled the room, a stark contrast to the weight pressing down on me. I tried to engage, to appear normal, but my mind raced with unease. The man's eyes would flick to me occasionally, and each time they lingered just a second too long. At one point he leaned back, his arm draping over the back of the chair, his gaze fixed on me. "You're even more beautiful than he described," he said smoothly, the compliment landing like a dart to my chest. I flushed, glancing at my husband for his reaction, but he simply smiled, as though this was exactly what he expected. "I told you," he said, his tone light. "She's incredible." The man's grin widened. "That she is." The exchange felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out. My mind screamed at me to say something, to protest, to end this charade, but my voice remained trapped in my throat. Instead, I reached for the glass of water on the table, my hands trembling as I sipped, desperate for a moment to collect myself. Then my husband stood. "I'll let you two get acquainted," he said, his voice casual, as though he were leaving me with an old friend instead of a stranger who made my skin crawl. My heart stopped. "Wait, where are you going?" I blurted out, my voice sharper than I intended. He turned to me, his expression calm, almost amused. "Just to the other room. I'll be close by." Before I could protest further, he was gone, leaving me alone with the man whose presence seemed to suck the air from the room. The silence between us was deafening. I focused on the glass in my hands, willing my racing heart to calm. "So," he said, breaking the silence, his voice low and deliberate, "tell me about yourself." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he replied, leaning forward slightly, his eyes locked onto mine. "I want to know what makes you tick, what you dream about, what excites you." His words were laced with something I couldn't quite place. Curiosity, yes, but also something darker, something that made my stomach twist. I shifted in my seat, forcing a smile. "There's not much to tell. I'm pretty ordinary." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "There's nothing ordinary about you." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I tried to steer the conversation to safer ground, asking him about his work, his life, anything to shift the focus away from me. But no matter how hard I tried, he always brought it back, his questions probing, his gaze unrelenting. As the minutes dragged on, the weight of his presence became unbearable. He leaned closer with each passing moment, his body language growing more invasive, his words more pointed. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with an unspoken tension that left me on edge. I wanted to scream, to tell him to leave, to call my husband back into the room, but I couldn't. I was trapped in this twisted game, forced to endure the growing unease that churned in my stomach. And yet, despite the fear, there was something else, a nagging question in the back of my mind. Why had my husband left me alone with him? Did he trust this man? Or did he trust me? Or was there something more to this that I didn't yet understand? The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're nervous," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice barely steady. His smile widened, and for a moment I thought I saw something predatory in his expression. "Good," he said simply, "because tonight it's just us." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding, as I realized that the night was far from over, and that I might not be prepared for what was to come. He put his hand on my chest, then started kissing me. Then he put something inside me. Pain started, bleeding started. But I do not know what occurs with me. When the sun finally rose, the shadows of the night lingered, and I knew I'd never be the same. The soft light of dawn crept through the window, pale and hesitant, as though it too feared illuminating the wreckage of the night before. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in the blanket that had done little to shield me from the chill inside me. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to stop, replaying every moment in vivid, excruciating detail. The room was unnervingly silent, except for the distant hum of traffic outside. My husband stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the pale morning light. He hadn't spoken much since I returned to the bedroom hours ago. I wondered if he was giving me space or just didn't know what to say. Either way, his silence felt deafening. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why did you leave me alone with him?" My voice was barely a whisper, but the sharpness in my tone sliced through the quiet. He turned slowly, his face unreadable. "I thought it would be easier for you two to connect," he said after a pause, his words hesitant, as if testing how they'd land. "Connect?" I repeated, my voice rising. The word felt like a slap. "You thought abandoning me with a stranger was the right thing to do? Did you even consider how I felt? What if something had happened?" His expression faltered, a flicker of guilt flashing across his face before he masked it with a feeble attempt at calm. I trusted him. He's not the type to cross lines. "Not the type?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You weren't there, were you? You didn't see the way he looked at me, the way he dismissed every boundary like they were a joke. You have no idea what I went through." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I let the anger pour out, raw and unfiltered. "You left me vulnerable, completely exposed, because you wanted to live out some fantasy. Do you even realize what you've done?" He took a step toward me, his hands raised as if to soothe me, but I flinched and he froze. His hesitation spoke volumes. "I didn't mean for it to turn out this way," he said weakly. "I thought you'd enjoy it." "Enjoy it?" My voice broke, tears streaming down my face now. "How could you think I'd enjoy being humiliated, disrespected, and terrified? Do you even know me at all?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. He looked down, avoiding my gaze, and for a moment I thought I saw regret in his posture. But regret wasn't enough. It couldn't erase what had happened. I stood, wrapping the blanket tighter around me like a shield. "I need space," I said, my voice steady despite the tears. "I can't stay here right now." "Wait," he said, his voice panicked. "We can talk about this, please." I shook my head, the weight of my decision settling over me. Number you had your chance to protect me and you failed. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." His shoulders sagged, but I didn't wait to hear another excuse. I packed a small bag, my movements robotic as I gathered my essentials. My mind replayed flashes of the night, his smile, the way he leaned too close, the words he whispered that I could never forget. Each memory cemented my resolve. As I walked to the door, I paused, glancing back at my husband one last time. His face was etched with a mixture of regret and helplessness, but it wasn't enough to make me stay. "I need time to figure out if I can ever forgive you," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "But right now, I need to take care of myself." I stepped out into the crisp morning air, the sunlight washing over me like a fragile promise of a new beginning. The scars of the night still clung to me, raw and aching, but for the first time in hours I felt a sliver of control returning. I didn't know where I was going or how I'd heal, but one thing was certain: I wouldn't let the darkness of that night define me. Not anymore.